Let me ask you something. Africa has 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 40% of the world's gold, up to 90% of the world's chromium and platinum, the largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, and uranium on the planet, 65% of the world's arable land, and somehow, we are the poor ones. Now, I'm not here to make you angry. I'm here to make you informed, because angry without information just makes you loud. And we've been loud enough. Today, we're going to understand exactly how this works. Not in theory, with numbers, with names, with receipts. Welcome to Explain It Like I'm from Uganda. I'm your host, Tobias. Let's get into it. Let's start with the basics, because sometimes you need to say the obvious thing out loud before people believe it. Africa is not poor in resources. Africa is one of the richest pieces of land on this planet. Full stop. Africa holds roughly 1/3 of the entire world's mineral reserves. Gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, platinum, uranium. One continent, 1/3 of everything underground. Your phone, yes, the one you're watching this on, has cobalt in the battery. Where did that cobalt come from? The Democratic Republic of Congo produces over 70% of the world's cobalt supply. 70%. And yet the DRC is consistently ranked among the poorest countries on Earth. It sits at number 186 out of 191 countries on the Human Development Index. Think about that. The country that powers every electric vehicle, every smartphone, every laptop on Earth, sitting at 186. Sub-Saharan Africa also holds about 30% of proven critical mineral reserves, copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, that the entire world needs for the green energy transition. The IMF estimates these four minerals alone will generate $16 trillion in global revenues over the next 25 years. $16 trillion. And we are the poor ones. Okay? So the money is real. The wealth is real. The question is, where is it going? Let's talk about that. Here is the part that nobody puts on the charity posters. Africa is not a net receiver of money from the world. Africa is a net sender. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development tracked illicit financial flows out of Africa. Their finding? Over $88 billion leaves Africa every single year. That is money that should stay on the continent, in tax revenue, in wages, in public services, just gone. How does it leave? Let me explain the main methods because this is where it gets creative. Method 1. Trade misinvoicing. A mining company digs cobalt out of the ground in the DRC. They sell it. But when they report the sale to the government for tax purposes, they report a much lower price than what they actually received. The difference, billions of dollars, disappears offshore. This is called trade misinvoicing. It is one of the primary ways money is illegally transferred out of African countries, and it is incredibly common. The World Bank found that African governments capture only about 40% of the revenue they could potentially collect from their own natural resources. 40%. They are leaving 60% on the table. Or rather, someone else is picking it up off the table. Method 2. Sweet deals that aren't sweet for us. Sometimes there's no crime involved, just a very bad deal. A foreign company comes to a government, usually one that is in debt, and says, "We will extract your oil, your gold, your lithium. In return, we will give you a royalty, a small percentage." The government, desperate for cash, signs. The company extracts billions. The country gets a fraction. The raw material leaves. No processing, no refinery, no jobs. Just the rock, dug up and shipped out. West Africa produces 70% of the world's cocoa beans, but contributes less than 1% of the global chocolate market. The DRC produces 70% of global cobalt, but only 1% is refined inside the country before it's exported. They send out the raw material. Someone else adds the value. Someone else makes the real money. Method 3. Plain theft. And then sometimes it's just theft. No euphemisms. In 2023, the DRC's finance minister stated that the country was losing nearly $1 billion a year in cobalt alone, smuggled illegally across the border. 1 billion per year, one mineral, one border. The UN Environment Programme estimated that between 700 million and $1.3 billion worth of minerals, timber, and other resources are illegally smuggled out of conflict zones in eastern DRC every single year. Now you understand why there is a conflict in eastern DRC. It is not a tribal dispute. It is a business model. Control the land, control the minerals, ship them out. Somebody gets very rich. And it is not the Congolese. Now I want to make something clear. I am not saying this is all external. I am not saying African governments have no responsibility. Corruption exists. Bad governance exists. That is real, and we should say it. But corruption and bad governance do not explain everything. Because the system that exists today was not an accident. Let's go back. 1884, Berlin, Germany. Representatives from 14 European nations gathered for what they called the Berlin Conference. They divided the African continent among themselves, drew the borders we still live inside today, decided who owned what. 0 Africans were in that room. Those borders separated ethnic groups, combined rivals, cut through kingdoms that had existed for centuries. And they were drawn not for the people living there, but to organize efficient extraction of resources for Europe. That infrastructure, the railways, the ports, the roads, was built to move resources out, not to connect communities, not to build economies, out, to the coast, to the ships, to Europe. Between 1980 and 2018, Sub-Saharan Africa received nearly $2 trillion in foreign direct investment and development aid. In the same period, it emitted over $1 trillion in illicit financial flows. The continent was, in net terms, sending money out, not receiving it. And today we still have trade agreements that make it cheaper to import finished goods from Europe than to process our own raw materials into finished goods and sell them. We still have loan conditions from international financial institutions that tell governments to privatize national resources, meaning sell them to foreign companies as a condition of receiving credit. The continent is not poor because Africans are lazy or incapable or disorganized. The continent appears poor because there is a very efficient system, centuries old, still running, that moves wealth from here to somewhere else. Understanding that is not self-pity, it is strategy, because you cannot fix a problem you have mislabeled. So, let's recap. Africa holds a third of the world's minerals, up to 90% of some of the most valuable ones. The continent has the land, the water, the resources to be genuinely, embarrassingly wealthy. But every year, over $88 billion leaves the continent in illicit flows alone. African governments collect only 40 cents of every dollar their resources could earn. Raw materials leave, and the value is added somewhere else. And this system has roots that go back over a century, to rooms where Africans were not invited. Here is the part I want you to hold on to. The opposite of poverty is not charity. It is ownership, processing, policy. It is adding value to what you have before it leaves. Countries that got rich did not get rich by exporting raw materials. They got rich by making things, by refining, by manufacturing, by building industries around what the ground gave them. That is the conversation Africa needs to be having. Not, how do we get more aid, but How do we stop giving away what we already have? We are not poor, we are being robbed. There is a difference, and knowing the difference is where it starts. That's episode 1. If this made you think, share it. If it made you angry, good, share it faster. I'm Tobias. This is Explain It Like I'm from Uganda. See you next week.